depending on where you are in the world, or this evening if you're joining us from over on the USA East Coast. And before going on and handing over to our moderator, I would like to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. And without further ado, I would like to hand over. Oh, sorry, I think I've got the wrong holding slides up for this. So if everyone would just like to hold on one quick second. To get the conversation going, I would like to hand over to our moderator, Sean, while I kind of handle some technical difficulties in the background. Sean, over to you to introduce the panelists briefly. 1 moment, please.
Thank you, Georgia. No problem. We can talk about Southern Europe if you prefer, but I think let's stick with the topic we've been allocated. Firstly, welcome everybody. Capacities Subsea World. This is the 4th day of the program. Today, it's a bit of an Asia spotlight panel. With a focus on navigating congested waters while reaching the next billion is the title. With me today, I've got some very distinguished guests and well-known players from within the sector, particularly in Asia. So I have Chang Wago. He's a director of network planning from China Telecom. We have Bevan Slattery. He's a founder of Subco and quite a few other things as well, but we'll stick with Subco for the purposes of today. And we have Takahiro Sumamoto, who's the CEO of Pacific Crossing and also Senior Vice President of Submarine Cables at NTT. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for giving us your time today. Just to tee it up a little bit in context, so there's talk about attempts to overcome choke points all the time, but in Southeast Asia, the Straits of Malacca and the Luzon Strait tend to be 2 of the key choke points, and of course, Singapore. There's current attempts out there to overcome the choke points of Luzon with cables like Bifrost and Echo coming along quite nicely. We also want to talk about the role of new data center deployments and Singapore's moratorium on DCs, and potentially how that impacts on new cables and people's thinking about where to build to in the future. So with that backdrop, what I'd like to do is kick off initially with a short presentation from China Telecom just on the ADC cable, Asia Direct cable, to give everyone a bit of context on the region and help people understand what's going on in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. So Georgia, if you don't mind, if you could please hand over the
absolutely
presentation and I'll like to
1 second, please. Sorry.
And without further ado, I'll hand over to the Asia Direct Cable MC and co-chair, Chang Wago. If you'd like to run through this presentation with us and familiarise us with this new cable, that would be fantastic.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, everybody. So actually, I'm Victor Chang from the China Telecom Global Limited. So I'm in charge of the submarine cable planning and construction. Today, I'd like to, on behalf of the Asia Direct Link Cable Consortium, to make a brief introduction of ADC cable. Actually, yeah, ADC cable was start to build from 2 years ago. Yeah, last year we signed the CMA and supply contract. Can you help me to the next slide? Yes. So let us have some brief. I mean, it's the first one. Previous one. Yes. So you see the ADC Asia Direct cable. We have for this cable, it's a typical consortium, typical in Asia. So we call it Asia Direct. So for the consortium, we have parties. You see, we have China Telecom, China Unicom, NT. It's from Thailand. In the past, it's called CAT. Now it's NT, new name. Also the PRDT in Philippines. Also the incumbent carrier in Asia, Singtel. also the SoftBank from Japan, and the Tata Communications and the wholesale from Vietnam. So that's a consortium party members. You see, it's quite good consortium. So yeah, most key players in the region, they are still investing in the cable, are joining this consortium. So for this cable, so we have in the region, we say we have a highest cable capacity. That means the maximum fiber pair for the trunk, for some part is 8 fiber pair, for some part is 16. Later we'll see which part is 16 and which part is 8. It's 8 fiber pairs. So basically, the total system distance is nearly nearly 9,400 kilometers. So we also follow the popular business model, is trunk plus branch model. So for the trunk, there are Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan. So finally, the supplier is NEC. Of course, technically, we use RODM technology. That's a new popular technology for the submarine industry. In particular, for the ADC, we follow the open cable, but we also have the pop flexibility. We have choice of pops in the trunk. Okay, based on current plan, the ADC will be RFS in 2022, last quarter. Yeah, I think that's a basic characteristic of ADC cable. Next. Yes, so the ADC trunk, because trunk owned by every party, the branch is just belong to some parties. So I just can introduce the trunk. You see the trunk from Singapore to Japan is 8 fiber pairs. And there's a BU in between. The BU to Hong Kong is 16 fiber pairs. That's a basic trunk structure. So in Singapore, our landing station is at Tuas. Japan, the landing station is in Maruyama. And in Hong Kong, it's Trincanco or CHK. For each trunk landing, we can have the 2 types of pops. We call common pop. That means every party can go there. Also, we have individual pop. The individual have their choice. They can go to their specific pops. I think that's a basic structure. So currently, the ADC is still on track. That's a basic situation for Asia. So after construction of ADC, I believe the ADC will play the important role in the Asia region as a trunk. Thank you. Mr. Sham, back to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Georgia, for the slide. It's interesting. I've been in Southeast Asia now 20 years or more, and in our business at AP Telecom, literally it's been the hot route. Always has been that Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan triangle. It's been the one that we sell all day, and have continued to sell all day. But I'll just ask you before we move on, and I want to talk a bit more about ADC later on, Wago. But I just want to tee it up and get off with a couple of high-level questions that are affecting everybody in the region. So, as I said, Asia-Pac's historically been all about that hot route between Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan. But I think it's changing a little bit now. India is now coming into play with multiple new cables planned. There's multiple new cables planned from India to Singapore, both from Chennai and Mumbai, and even from Oman back to Singapore via India. There's some direct US to Singapore cables coming online that I mentioned earlier. It creates a bit of an interesting dynamic because it's almost like I don't want to call it a perfect storm, but it feels that way, in as much as it's creating further pressure on Singapore as a single point of failure. So you've got more cables coming in from India. You've got more cables coming in directly from the US. And on top of that, you've got a moratorium on data center builds in Singapore. So it feels to me that Singapore is becoming really is becoming a single point of failure, and it's being magnified by the increase of all these new cables coming back into Singapore. So with that as the backdrop, obviously coupled with the geopolitics, which we'll talk about as well. Bevan, in Asia, this Asia Pac in particular, there's just so many moving parts right now. I mean, the geopolitics seem to be having a bit of a cooling effect on Hong Kong as a bit of a hub. There's obviously the challenges with the South China Sea. You've got Singapore's moratorium on DC builds. I mean, they have the power constraints that they're suffering. All in the meanwhile, the backdrop, data consumption's going through the roof. So with all that in mind, what are you seeing today? And I suppose, importantly, where do you think it's all heading in terms of digital infrastructure and sub-cables over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's usually the crystal ball. It's pretty easy to kind of see the next 5 years because this infrastructure takes a while to build. But I think as an industry, we've actually got to get past Singapore. And I've been a big investor in Singapore and continue to be a big supporter. But from a point of failure, or a single point of failure, it's really becoming huge. You know, the congestion and getting in there it's going to be next to impossible, I think, over the next 3 years to basically get cables in some of those areas. So I think what we're seeing is we're now starting to see diversity outside of that hot route. You know, as I said, Bifrost and Echo are going express from the US. They're going to Singapore, but I think they're going to start popping into places, not just Guam and Palau. You're seeing that as well. I think there'll be moves to go into Darwin in Australia. You know, that because every cable that goes into Singapore, as I think people might know, I'm building the Oman Australia cable, which is the first express cable that goes from Australia into Europe, the Middle East, and then Europe. But the most remarkable thing, it is the single and only cable that goes from Europe into Asia that doesn't go through the Malacca Strait. I mean, every single cable in the world, every single submarine cable in the world goes through a 130 kilometre stretch of water that is within 100 or 200 kilometres away from probably the most active seismic area in the world in the last 50 years in recordable memory. I mean, 2 of the biggest 5 earthquakes that have happened in living memory have happened literally within 200 kilometres of that. So I think what's going to happen is, and what we're starting to see, is there's these hot routes, but all of a sudden I think people are going to start needing to balance, those hot routes, those really low latency express routes with, sure, might be slightly longer, diverse routes, but they're going to be more secure routes as well. To your point, the geopolitics is becoming a thing. Cabotage, we've seen it obviously in Indonesia, now playing in Malaysia. I think it'll happen in South China Sea. I think that's only a matter of 3 to 5 years away, where there'll be certain nations along that route will start requiring a flagged vessel to do works and to maintain and install. But also things like fishing, fish attraction devices and fishing is starting to cause, the amount of fishing activity that's happening in those shallow waters is extraordinary, and a lot of the outages going through there. So I think we're going to start seeing people focusing more on secure routes, diverse routes, more stable routes, and that are going to be secure for the next 25 years. And I think that's a key thing people are forgetting in the submarine cable industry versus the data center industry. These are 25-year investments. When you're looking at putting the end point of this asset, you've got to be thinking about things like, what's the stability and security of that country or region or whatever it's going to be? What's the fishing and things and activity like that? What access to energy and even renewable energy is going to be? How well does it service countries nearby? So I think that's what's going to be impacting a lot of what's going to happen in the next 5 to 25 years. And I think people are going to start taking a fairly a different approach to building these systems. They're going to move from just being express, fastest route, lowest latency, to, hey, we need to take a more holistic approach to this for the next 25 years.
Yeah, look, if you think about Singapore and the Malacca Strait, just only imagine the permitting processes for laying over laying over pipelines and other cables at the moment. It must be horrendous. And as you mentioned, you've got the volcanic activity. You couple that with what happens in the Luzon Strait with the earthquake activity, and Takahiro will talk about ANC in a little while because that's been designed to avoid that. But I think, you know, if you look at the two big issues for Asia in terms of connectivity back to the US, and even intra-Asia itself, you know, the Luzon Strait and the Malacca Strait, we've doubled down. I mean, we just keep piling on, which to
Completely
me
agree. And Sean, to your point, I mean, look what happened in Suez Canal. You know, all the shipping happened up and down one canal, and then a boat gets stunk. Once that route all of a sudden stopped working, you know, the world's delivery timeframes, you know, for anything, I mean, whether you're getting a coffee table or a car, have completely blown out. And you know, at least they were able to go back around Africa. But to your point, you know, about we keep doubling down on the same routes that's there. All of a sudden, and we're completely all in on Malacca Strait. We're all in on Singapore. We're all in these countries. That's going to change, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, I remember reading a presentation written by John Hibbard, must have been 15 years ago, and it said, "Don't lose it on the Luzon." But yeah, and that's a real thing. But I think, you know, that leads me to ask all of you about the Bifrost and Echo routes. They are a diverse route, obviously. One could call it a diverse route, or one could call it a main route now. I'm not sure. That being said, from a diversity perspective, yes, they bypass the Luzon and the Malacca to a large extent. But given that there have never been cables laid on that route, let me ask you if they're secure routes. So, or is that still an element of risk that's completely unknown yet because no one's done it before? Do we really know what's down there? Takahiro, what are your thoughts on those new routes?
All right. Yep. I think that will, you know, now that the Luzon is totally kind of congested, and due to the difficulties of the complexity of geopolitical conditions, I think that route, you know, Bifrost, Echo, they laid that route, but I think more will come. I mean, we need diversity, and you know, if you can't lay the new cable, or you know, you take longer lead time to lay the cable in the congested area, then, you know, as a cable owner, you have to secure diversity. You need to lay the cable, and then, you know, like Bifrost or Echo cable, you will seek the route diversity. That's my view. And the you know, say you mentioned the Malacca Strait, and the you know, most of the cables are laid at the side of Malaysia. But if you seek diversity in that strait, then, you know, Indonesian side should be an option. And the our new cable project MIST, that goes through Indonesia side. And the you know, NTT has a license in Indonesia, and the discussion with the Indonesian government is going going on track as planned. So that could be an option, that even in the congested area like Malacca Strait, you can choose to lay the cable in the Indonesian side rather than Malaysia side. That could be an option. Well, in fact, to lay the cable from Singapore to India, you don't have a good alternative than to go through the Malacca Strait. So, so that the you know, even in the narrow congested area, you have to seek an alternative. That should be an idea of the new cable planning.
Yeah, actually, let's talk about MIST, and let's talk about India in general. I think, you know, India's been an underserved market. It's a booming market. We're seeing massive investment by the OTTs and the data infrastructure players just in general in India. New DCs being built left, right, and centre. A lot of new builds proposed. I know yours isn't proposed. Yours is being built. MIST is being built, but there are at least 3 others that I'm aware of that are looking at Mumbai, Chennai, Singapore, and even some further back towards Oman. It's an interesting route, and all of these are pointing at Singapore, but we're starting to see, I know at least 2 of them that have Singapore as the main trunk, but are also looking to branch into places like Malaysia and Thailand as alternative landings. I just wonder whether or not that's to avoid cabotage, whether it's to avoid the Malacca Strait, or whether it's to avoid potentially wholly and solely relying on Singapore. Because a lot of the traffic out of India, I imagine, is destined for North Asia, not just Singapore, or destined for the US. And perhaps heading further north of Singapore and cutting across and avoiding the southern tip there where Singapore is a faster route and probably offers a little bit of diversity and security from Singapore. So Takahiro, can we talk about the experience of NTT in the congested areas of Asia in general?
All right.
My mind goes straight to ACE or ASE and the Luzon, for example.
Yep. Well, when NTT constructed ASC and it started the service in 2012, 2013. The idea was that to have the shortest latency path between Tokyo and Singapore, and avoid the area where where we have frequent earthquakes or vulnerable to typhoon. So we laid a cable in the Luzon Strait, but to the side of the Philippines, it goes just north of Luzon Island. And in those days, the congestion was not so much an issue, but now it is an issue. But anyway, in those days, we didn't have that huge issue of congestion. But the primary idea is to have shortest latency path and avoid the frequent earthquake area. So that was the history of ASC. And as for Malacca Strait, as I mentioned, that we didn't have any other choice. And you mentioned the landing in Malaysia. Well, the primary reason is that we studied, and the market potential led us to install another landing in Malaysia.
Okay, makes perfect sense. But I suppose the intrinsic benefit of having that landing in Malaysia is you have bifurcated risk when hitting Southeast Asia. So that's a good strategy. Just want to talk about, given Takahiro, given that you're also the CEO of PC1, so you're a long time involved in Trans-Pacific cables, long time involved. I mentioned earlier at the start that we're sort of staring down the barrel of almost a petabyte of capacity coming online over the next 3 to 5 years across the Pacific to Asia. Wago gave us a presentation on ADC cable. I personally don't get the sense there's enough intra-Asia capacity being built or coming online that's going to be able to effectively distribute all of this traffic, all of this capacity coming across the Pacific. Given that this is home for all three of you, I'd be really interested to get everyone's views on that. I mean, SJC2, ADC, CME, not really. So is there really enough capacity coming online intra-Asia to keep up with what's coming out of India and also out of Asia, out of the US? I'll start with Wago. What do you think? Is there enough capacity intra-Asia? Is ADC big enough? Is ADC2 on the board?
Okay, I think ADC, we say it's currently is the highest because the ADC use new technology. Also, the system, the cable fiber number is high. I think the capacity is huge, but for the telecommunication infrastructure, no matter how big, one is not enough. That the other expert already said we need secure, we need diverse. So I think it's not enough, basically. Also, there's some transit capacity. Yeah, Trans-Pacific and Europe. Yeah, they need transit in Asia because Asia is still the most active business region. more traffic generated in this region.
Takahiro, what do you think? Is there enough capacity being built intra-Asia to keep up?
The straight answer is no. We need more cables. I observe the Trans-Pacific traffic is growing, and then and they are going to Asia, and then we need intra-Asia capacity more. We have several cables, and we are upgrading. As for Asian cable or Trans-Pacific cable, we are still upgrading, but it may be full. Then we have to think about of the next step for sure.
Yeah, Bevan, what do you think?
Yeah, I certainly think, is there enough capacity? I think, what's driving the capacity, back in the kind of noughties, and early last decade, it was certainly video, even up to the middle of, 2015, 16, 17, still video. But I think with caching technologies and things, that's going to be diminished somewhat. But really what had taken over is cloud. Of course, the long tail on video, 80% will be cached locally and 90% cached locally, whatever. That 10% is still a very large volume. I'm not going to deny that. So that's going to keep growing the demand, no question. The one-to-one streaming on video, everyone's, FaceTiming and video conferencing, that's not cacheable. So, that's going to keep increasing and improving. But certainly cloud, the consumption of cloud and everyone just throwing everything in the cloud, the machine to machine and the inter-region networking is going to keep driving it. The thing I think what we're going to need is more cables. I think there's going to be a bit of a change. And if you look at the Asia Pac region as we all saw it historically, you went from US to Japan down, you went from, everything kind of connected, as you said, Sean, from, let's say, I'll give you the Australian view. You need to connect to the US, you need to connect to Guam, and you need to connect into Singapore. And you were set effectively, right? Everything kind of had these three hubs. I think what's going to change is I think we're going to start finding more and more alternate routes. And I think so the newer cables certainly it's going to take some of that demand that is coming, but I think we're going to start, the continual growth, but I think we're going to start seeing more of those original trunk routes or hot routes as you call them. But I think we're going to start seeing these secondary routes, again, coming from the impacts of the other ones. So the growth is going to continue, but I think we're going to see it continue with some interesting places. And the example I'll give is one of the reasons I'm looking at building Hyper One, which is a new backbone for Australia, is because I actually see a potential for Northern Australia to play a pretty significant role. 1 second. Bit of a cough, not COVID, had test 2 days ago. And so I think, Perth, Sydney, Brisbane, Darwin can have a play in that. And the reason I give you the example, we're seeing Bifrost and we're seeing Echo go past. I think we're going to start seeing them kind of coming down. And the reason being, there's 500 million people within 50 milliseconds. And one thing about Northern Australia, it's great for satellite, but it's amazing for solar. So I think the renewable energy problem you're seeing in Singapore, I think we're going to start seeing something like that kind of take off. Anyway, so I think these interesting routes are going to keep kind of popping up, and we're going to start seeing some routes that have never been built before become, as you said, probably new trunk routes.
Yeah, and what's a great point in case being Darwin, and I'm not just saying this because I'm Australian, and I actually lived in Darwin for a few years, there's that solar array project now. So Darwin are actually building the Northern Territory is building a massive solar farm, and they're building a cable to Singapore. They're selling power to Singapore. So you'd have to argue, given the proximity and the fact that they're providing redundant power to Singapore. I think it's something like 20% of Singapore's power needs. I can't remember the exact stat, but it's a lot. And you have to wonder, well, then does Darwin become like an off-net DR site for Singapore for a whole bunch of things? So there's probably new ways that people are starting to look at things. And I think I wanted to talk about this later, but while we're on the topic, let's talk about diversity and where emerging hubs may come. So with the backdrop, guys, of the geopolitics, cabotage, Malacca Strait, Luzon, new routes being created, such as the FAT route around the Great Circle route from LA to Singapore. Beyond Singapore, where do we feel in, say, 5 to 10 years' time these new hubs will be? Are they going to be, you know, Philippines? Are they going to be Taiwan? Is it going to be Thailand? So I'd like to go around the room and sort of get everyone's view on where they think new hubs will emerge. Obviously, Takahiro will never lose Tokyo as a hub, but I'm just suggesting that things may shift as the geopolitics remain in place. So I'll start with you, Takahiro. Where do you think the new emerging, let's call them secondary hubs, will be in Asia?
Good questions. Singapore, Singapore continues to be a hub. You mentioned Tokyo, but to be more precise, AGC land in Shima, and that could be the another hub, because it is away from, say, Tokyo, but it has good connectivity there, so it could be another hub. So that's my kind of speculation at this moment. And as for Taiwan, Philippines, I'm not quite sure.
Okay, Wago, what do you think? Where do you think new hubs will emerge? Will it be, Taiwan, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Darwin? Where do you think we'll start to see a lot more activity in the region?
Okay, I think it's actually the tradition, the Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan in general, it's a hub already. So of course we need more hubs in the region. So, but still the emerging as a new hub is not easy. So I think there, for example, Philippines, Thailand, yeah, it's possible as a tier 2 hubs in the region, but they are competing. I mean, there are a lot of things to be competing each other for the policy, for the cost, for the facilitations. Yeah, I think it's we do need more connectivity. Then for the network, we need the resilience. So then there's some middle point. It's okay, but it depends on the comprehensive evaluation.
Bevan, what's your views? I mean, given just with the backdrop of you've got your investments in Indigo, you've got your investments in OAC, and now you're looking at building that national network or Hyper One for Australia. So you've got a vested interest in that southern part of Southeast Asia. But so where do you see those emerging hubs coming from? We're calling them hubs, but tier two hubs.
I think that's good. I think the way to put it, tier 2 hub, and almost kind of like tier 2 hub is the right word. It's somewhere between edge and a hub, right? So it's all up in the air at the moment. So we're seeing, and who drives this? It's the cloud providers. So right now, the cloud, certainly what I see anyway. And so we're seeing the cloud providers all scrambling now, looking at what are locations in which they can actually establish new points of interconnect. And obviously, route, close to existing routes or popular routes or routes that they can kind of expand on. That's very important. I mean, just because something is there, it doesn't make sense. So I think you've got to pick something that becomes a natural point or an interconnection point on this new route, which you're seeing, for example, with Bifrost and Echo is a good example. The other things that they're looking for is cheap access to power, low latency to the other, count the number of millions of eyeballs and low latency getting there, a decent backbone across the country. That's pretty important as well, to be able to get to other landing points and interconnect to the existing kind of hubs. So the places that I'm seeing them looking at are, secondary hubs in Indonesia, secondary hubs, looking at Philippines, how attractive is that? But there's some challenges politically there, but also Network resiliency there is a bit challenging across the country, and cost of interconnect and regulatory environment. You know, they kind of got this list of things they kind of need to tick off, and there isn't that natural place like Singapore that ticks it off: regulatory, security, you know, all the things. But they're working their way down a list. So I'm seeing Philippines, Indonesia, as you said, Malaysia, Thailand, India as being those kind of places they're looking at.
It's interesting because we're involved in most of those markets, and you know, the word open access rolls off the tongue just as easy as the word hub rolls off the tongue, and they both mean completely different things, right? So, you know, what are the characteristics of a hub? All the things you just mentioned, Bevan, all the things you didn't, you know, the opposite of what you just mentioned, you know, unfriendly regulatory environments, you know, ease of use. Are there other cables there already? You know, geographically, does it make sense? So there's a whole bunch of boxes that have to get ticked off.
This is the big opportunity, Sean. You know, like, countries need to actually start thinking, hang on, there is an amazing opportunity for us to actually be the new interconnection regime, you know, sorry, a new major alternate hub, a new tier 2, potentially tier 1 hub for the market. And here are the things that we need to do to make that happen. I mean, a really good example for that for me is Oman. You know, you got to, you know, I seriously thought about Djibouti versus Oman, and I had to think really carefully about that. But when I sat there and said, hey, 25 years, you know, of what's going on here, you know, Oman, to me, it served the Gulf. I know there's going to be expansion in Salalah, but the reason I ended up picking Oman over that was the regulatory is a bit more certain. I had a pretty good partner in Oman in what we were doing. It didn't pick fights with a lot of people around the place. So, you know, from an investment standpoint, that was a place that I kind of went to. Versus some of the other places around there, which were, I mean, Djibouti was close, but I just had to, you know, because it's my own money out of my own pocket, I sat there and thought, gosh, you know, where's it going to be in 25 years? So I think there's a great opportunity for those 4 countries I mentioned. And the thing what Oman has done pretty well, and they've got the Equinix facility going in there, is they kind of separated out international cables coming in to be the hub, so to speak, but they still have a fair bit of control over the domestic network. So, you know, inviting in international cables and making it, you know, give submarine cable protection zones, work out with the fishing people, you know, provide good access to power, provide these things. You don't have to open up the entire access to Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, whatever it's going to be. But if you actually make it inviting for just the international cables to once again land and interconnect and do the things they need to do, I think there's a massive opportunity for not just submarine cables, because we all know what follows that: cloud centers, data centers, jobs, skilled jobs, employment. I think that's you know, it's. I think we're going to need a country to step up and go, we see the opportunity, we're going to take it.
I think it's, you know, the challenge is, what gets disappointing sometimes is when a country does step up, but the consortia or the owners of the cable don't make it truly open access. Then nothing changes anyway. So you can have a deregulated environment, but if you're, you know, in a consortia and you're the landing party in XYZ country, and, you know, have to pay them the cross connect fee, have to use their backhaul, it really doesn't achieve the purpose that you're talking about, Bevan, at all. I think it's about open cables, definitely moving forward, can be the only way cables can commercialize successfully. And it's the same with, we talked about the hub. It's all about the ecosystem. So it's about attracting as many people to it as possible. And the only way you can do that is to tick all those boxes we talked about. Challenging in the Philippines, challenging in Malaysia at the moment. But things hopefully will get better. One thing, Bevan, you did mention was security. And I just want to talk for a minute, guys, make sure everyone's aware. There's some new technology out called FiberSense. Not sure if you're all aware of it, but Bevan, do you want to just give a Reader's Digest version of what that's about?
Yeah, sure. Declaration, I'm actually a major investor and chairman of it. But so long story short, FiberSense is a technology that's been protecting my network in Singapore and Australia. Effectively, technology developed by an Australian here that's puts a piece of equipment on it and is able to detect events nearby, but with incredible accuracy. So, you know, we've detected about 30,000 events near the terrestrial cables I have in Australia and Singapore. 2,500 of those events were rogue events. So basically, you put a piece of equipment, let's say in a data center or a landing station, and you can kind of see down the network. I've actually, now when I'm kind of deploying networks, I'm actually throwing an extra pair of fibers, for example, for the first 50 kilometers, kind of coming out of all my cable landing stations, where I can put this technology on there and understand it's in an armored cable and it's buried. So I think anyone with a conspiracy theory can safely put that away. But it's actually protecting a power cable here in Australia, and that's where we've seen the success. And so what we're able to see is we're able to see anchors hit near the cable, and we're able to see the vibration of that anchor dragging along the ocean floor. And we're able to see netting as well, so we're able to see nets kind of dragging on the ocean floor. And we kind of combine that with the beacon system. So we're able to kind of say that ship is dropping that anchor, 200 meters away from where our cable is, or 100 meters away from where our cable is. So, I think that the thing that we're seeing a lot, certainly I think about, and the reason, 50 kilometers, you kind of start getting pretty deep, and I think we're now going to be able to stretch it out to about 100 kilometers. It doesn't go through the repeaters, obviously. But really from our side, if we can kind of know what's happening near our cable from a physical asset protection standpoint, it's going to be a massive, massive boon for us. And I think what we're going to find over time is this is going to become mandatory, if not from insurers, but certainly just from a risk standpoint, to be able to see anyone dropping an anchor or even a FAD touching the cable. FADs don't generally cut it straight away. They take some time and rubbing and things. So we're deploying this. I've got it all on my fiber systems terrestrially in Australia, and not all of them, but the core areas, and it's been amazing. We're seeing an 80% reduction in rogue events, because as soon as someone pulls an excavator or a saw cutter or does something a bit, or touches a cable, we can send someone straight up to site. That's rogue. We send someone straight up to site. And they're kind of shocked. They're kind of like, well, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be digging here. And they're kind of like shocked by it. And so all of a sudden this learned behavior becomes in, where they're like, okay, we know that cable's protected or that street's protected, so we're going to comply with the law and do that. So I think basically what's going to happen is we're going to start seeing organizations, I think, almost making it mandatory that the critical infrastructure of telecoms is actually going to be protected by things like FiberSense. And we're deploying it right now, as I said, on submarine systems for the shore end piece, which is where 80% of the incidents actually happen.
Yeah. And that wasn't a setup, Bevan, to talk about FiberSense. I was actually thinking of FiberSense in the context of the Malacca Strait. And,
sorry, mate.
I'm just saying, that was just my little disclaimer. I was happy you talked about it, because I think it's important people know that it's out there. And I was thinking about it in the context of the Malacca Strait in particular, more so than the Luzon. Just with all the shipping through that region, it must be a
shipping and fishing. We're seeing, you're right, because they drop anchors and things. But I've had a cut in the last 12 months from a fish attraction device, at depth, which really surprised me. And we weren't sure what was going on, but when we pulled the cable up, it made a right mess of it, probably about 30, 40 kilometers of cable. Had we had FiberSense on it, we would have known about it immediately, and then we could have actually fixed it before it became a break. But yeah, I think that detection system is going to become pretty important moving forward. And that's another part about security. How do you make these systems more secure? It's not just the physical installation about it, but it's actually making these cables somewhat what I call digitally aware of their surroundings, particularly that physical aggression piece.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, it's just an interesting topic in itself. We could probably spend an hour just talking about all the applications you could use that for, particularly in our space. Actually, George has just sent me through a message. There's a question that's come in from somebody watching. So, and maybe I think Takahiro, you might be the best one to have a shot at this, because you alluded to it earlier. The question was how to bypass the Malacca Strait as well as Singapore. Is Singapore a must-have hub for Asia?
Well, when I talked about the mist that go through the Malacca Strait and the Indonesian side, I mentioned that we don't have a good alternative. So, if you say abandon, if you are if you're okay with laying longer, rerouting, then it can be okay. But from the budget standpoint, are you ready to bear the cost for a longer route or not? That's the point. So in my case, we didn't have a good alternative. So how to bypass? Sorry, I don't know the good answer.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it's possible to bypass. But one thing that's popping up on my radar of late, and I'd like to get all three of your opinions on this. We talk about Singapore. We've talked about Darwin. Batam is interesting, and we're getting a lot more inquiry in our business about people potentially wanting to land cables in Batam. The Indonesian government's trying to set it up as an economic free zone. Is it too close to Singapore? I mean, it's what, 40 kilometers away. It's just down the road. So I'd be keen to get everyone's thoughts on Batam as a potential new location to land cables, because then you've only got a short segment up to Singapore, almost as a branch rather than as a branch rather than as a trunk. What's everyone's thoughts on Batam? I don't know, Wago, what are your thoughts on Batam as a landing for Indonesia rather than Jakarta?
Okay, actually, you said we're talking about Singapore as a hub in the past. Now, so if there's a new hub, if Batam can be a new hub, then that's a possibility. If Batam cannot be a new hub, how can they replace hub? And that's my assumption. Yeah. So I think Batam, geographically that it's nearby to Singapore. If Batam, everything is similar to Singapore, maybe that's a possibility. Otherwise, it's a difficult. That's my observation. So of course, but the destination for the industries for example, maybe go to the Jakarta. Then from Batam, how to go to Jakarta? That's another issue. So it's not easy. We need a systematic solution. You said it's an ecosystem.
Takahiro, what do you think of Batam?
Well, geographically possible, but when you think of the maintenance of the hub, if you have important hub, then you need assurance in terms of the quality, and are you able to obtain the good support from suppliers, or are you able to hire good technical guys there to maintain the hub? That's a kind of challenging question. So I would say, possible, but challenging.
So I'll ask you the same question, but I'll put a different spin on it, Bevan. If you've got a key site and you've got your main site at site A, and it's a data center, and you need a DR site, right, so is Batam potentially a great location for a DR site for Singapore?
From a data center standpoint?
Or from a data center sub-cable standpoint. I mean, if you're going to build a submarine cable to Singapore, a spur to Batam is going to cost, peanuts in the context of a specific build.
Yeah, look, I've spent a bit too much time Google Earthing at night, this whole region. I think you're on the right track. I think what you need to do, you need to connect Batam to Singapore. I think you actually want, I think it does need to be on your shopping list, because I think Batam, very much like Singapore, had their problems with data centers running out of power. They're just running out of slots for submarine cables, when you guys have all built there, and I've built there once, and I've got a network in Singapore. There's a rule of when you build submarine cables, 2 or 3 times water depth kind of coming into this place, and as we all know, you have to drop a cable 10 meters deep in Singapore to avoid the anchors. So, it's actually an incredibly challenging place to build into. And there's only a couple of slots at Changi North and kind of at Tuas that's there, and they kind of keep moving the island out. the area that you can actually install. I look at that and we keep managing to put cables in there. I kind of get that. You know, I think the Singapore government should probably almost do something with the island of Batam and kind of make an interconnection point. I think that's almost what's going to be forced on the industry. The industry is often its own worst enemy in actually changing behaviour. We kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again. I think ultimately, though, what we've actually seen happen with Bifrost and Echo is that there just comes a breaking point where you've got to start changing that. So I think there's ways around that. I think there are options in the Malacca Strait. You know, I'm forming some of those up, but you know, I suppose watch your space. So I think there are these, to your point, I think there's these second tier hubs that are starting to form. And I think over the next 5 years, it'll be an interesting panel to kind of be on in 5 years' time and say, you know, what's changed. I fear that 80% won't have changed, but I think there'll be a few gems in this that will sit there and go, hey, you know, that worked. And I think they're in some key markets. I'm being vague, I'm sorry.
No, it's a tough one, right? We don't have crystal balls, but we do have about 8 minutes left. So what I wanted to do is just quickly go around the room and imagine that you have sole responsibility, and actually all of you do have sole responsibility. So for these issues. So if you had to prioritize the orders in which you'd address the challenges that we face in Asia Pac right now, would it be, which is the highest on the priority, second and third? Is it the Luzon? Is it the Malacca Straits? Is it Singapore as a single point of failure? Which one, which order would you focus on in terms of resolving those three, let's call them the key risks? So Takahiro, I'll start with you. So would it be the Luzon? Would it be the Malacca Straits? Or would it be the risk associated just with Singapore in general?
You know, well, good question. I would say Luzon, it's on the third of my list. And number one, I'm hesitant between Singapore and Malacca Strait. But I would say number one, Singapore. Number two, Malacca Strait. Number three, Luzon. Yeah.
Okay, great. Lego, what are your thoughts? Out of those three, which one's the most pressing? Which one's the least pressing? You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. I think it's difficult to distinguish which one is more. I think it's yeah, maybe I think it's basically in the same level. So in the region, if you want to have a cable, you need to solve at least two.
Of two of those three, yeah.
Yeah, and you must solve two issues, then you can success. Only one you cannot success.
Yeah. That's a very, very good political answer there. Bevan, what's your thoughts?
I think it's all of them, but that's the cop out. I know. I think, you know, over the next, again, if the question is, when you're investing now, you're investing to the year 2050. So if you're making an investment over that, I think what's the most important? I think the most important priority is to spread your investment and risk as best you can. You know, if you think Luzon Strait's if you think fishing and shipping in Luzon Strait's or Malacca Strait's going to continue to increase, or do you think geopolitics is going to play a greater problem? I think everyone's answer to that's going to be yes. You know, in terms of fishing, in terms of activity, in terms of whatever it's going to be, then you've got to look to get out of those, or at least get diverse routes out of those. So I genuinely think it's all of them. You know, because at the end of the day, the traffic that flows from, you know, one region to another region, it goes into Luzon, goes out to Malacca. Depends which way you look at it. I think it's all of it. I think it's, you know, example OAC. You know, we kind of bypass the whole lot, and we're doing that. Look, we're the first ones kind of doing it, and you know, I think as they say, the first guy through the wall gets a bit bloody, but you know, everyone else follows. But we're seeing the clouds do it between the US and Singapore. I think we're going to see some really interesting routes through there, and I think what that's recognising is we can't keep doing the same thing that we're doing, particularly if you say, what do we think it's going to be like in 2030? And I think we all agree in 2030, Singapore is going to be out of slots. The world's going to be looking for secondary homes. You know, I think, you know, South China Sea, in terms of fishing and congestion and other things, is going to continue there. As a responsible operator, I'll be looking to build as many interesting, diverse routes as possible.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate all of your time today. I think it's been a good chat. We're going to wrap up a minute, 3 or 4 minutes early, but that's fine. I'm sure you've all got lots to do with your day anyway. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. And Georgia, I'll hand back over to you.
Well, thank you, all of you, for that discussion. Again, apologies for the confusion slightly in the beginning there, but I would like to thank the panelists for participating today and sharing some really great insights, and Sean for moderating everyone. And once again, I would just like to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Thank you to Interaction, Autoglobe, PCCW Global, Peace Cable, Seaborn, and Windstream. And just a reminder that this session will be available on the Hub for the next 30 days. So if you would like to rewatch it or share it with a colleague, you can do so. On that note, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us and wish everyone a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.